Commercial real estate leases are probably the lifeblood of commercial investment property. It is essential to know the main aspects of a commercial lease in order to develop the right plan for short-term, mid-term, and long-term objectives of your commercial property if you're a landlord, and your business if you're a tenant. In this video, I'll cover we call it the ultimate guide to commercial real estate leases. I'll cover things like the main clauses. We'll get into the uncovering various structures, the options available to business looking to invest or lease commercial properties. I can't stress how important this is. Let me give you a couple of examples. A few years ago, I bumped into a person who's normally a pretty happy person, and I met him and said, "John, how you going?" "Not very well." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I've got a few problems with my landlord." I said, "What's the problem?" Because he was a panel beater, family business for about 40 years, and looked like staying another 40 years, the family. And I said, "Oh, what's the situation?" He said, "Oh, they don't want a panel beating shop in that place. They want to convert it to selling cars or something different." I said, "That's unusual on the other side." I said, "To me, it looked like it was too small for a car yard." But, yeah, that's what the landlord says. And I said to him, "What have you done about it? What are you doing about it?" He said, "I'm going to see my solicitor tomorrow." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They won't give you a new lease." He said, "No, they refuse to do a lease." I said, "I don't think anything the solicitor can do about it. Maybe you can ask the same question. Don't want to give you a new lease. They don't want to give you a lease. There's not much you can do about it." 3 or 4, 5 years later, guess what? There's still a panel beating business there. 40 years of goodwill disappeared, which someone else has inherited and continues to run the business to this day. I'll give you another story. Another client of mine, very successful coffee shop. I'll tell them they're negotiating with the landlord for a new lease. And a few months later, they told me that the landlord decided to sell the property. He's not issuing new leases. 20-year business, a 5-figure amount, goodwill, destined to disappear. So anyway, I said, "We've got to get to work." I tried to negotiate a few leases around the area. And fortunately, I managed to get another property, which is almost directly opposite where they were beforehand, fully refurbished, which fitted exactly what they wanted to do. They were lucky. Long-term lease. They've since purchased the building. Within 6 months, their turnover increased by 25%. They were lucky. The panel beater was not so lucky. That's why it's important that you've got a lease in place if you're running a business. Again, if you're a landlord, have your leases in sync to ensure that you're getting the highest and best use for your property and fits in to your plans for the future. Commercial real estate is a diverse landscape that includes everything from raw land to skyscrapers, to hotels, to motels, to childcare centres, to hospitals, educational establishments, shopping centres, telephone towers. The list goes on and on. The nature of businesses leasing commercial property space demands a range of lease options, some of which can be complex and varied. And the various levels of commercial real estate leases. Now, you've got the main ones, which are done by your lawyers. That's what I'll recommend. It's more comprehensive, and you must work. I suggest you work with your solicitor on this and seek legal advice at all times. Then you've got leases, which can normally be done by, depending on what state or country, by the estate agent. Normally have a maximum of about 3 years. Then below that, which is not really a lease, which I'll do in detail in a future video. And if you want to watch it, subscribe to this channel so I can notify you when it's issued, verbal or handshake leases. That's another story. Let's go through the commercial leases now. A lease or leasehold grants someone the right to use a property without owning it outright, from short-term rentals to long-term leases with varying degrees of ownership and responsibility. Why should you choose a lease? People choose to lease a property for various reasons. Now, you may have company which is starting up and they want to grow, have some growth quickly because they use all the capital to expand their business rather than expanding in property. So it suits their short-term needs, and they may decide to grow into larger premises down the track or go multi-unit down the track, or whatever it may be. So there's flexibility there. Understanding the motivations behind entering a lease agreement is critical for both tenants and landlords. Let's go through the types of lease options. Leases are mainly two groups. You've got your gross leases and your net leases. Now, in a nutshell, gross leases include all the outgoings. So you've got one lump sum payment. You're paying that amount of money every month or whatever the period negotiated with, and there are certain increases, which I'll talk about in the future. So all the outgoings included, one amount of money. Then you've got net leases, where you pay a base rent and you pay outgoings. Now, the leases where the tenant pays all the outgoings is sometimes called a triple net lease. So it varies. So generally, tenants pay all the outgoings. You know that you've got a rent for, say, $1,000 a week. That's what you're getting. Whereas a gross lease, if the maintenance costs increase substantially, you could be getting less on an amount. It suits different situations. Now, I found it when, periods of uncertainty, high inflation, gross leases tend to be more popular with tenants, and they've got the advantage when the economy is not going so well, they can negotiate further, and they're getting they know that they're paying a certain amount of money every month and no more than that, so they keep their costs under control. But the disadvantage of that is if the outgoings increase less than the rental amount increase, then it's an advantage to the landlord. So it can work both ways. And again, I mentioned that net lease is that the landlord is guaranteed a certain amount of money all the time and increases as per the increases in the lease. So what items are included in the lease? Again, it depends on your state or country you're in. You've normally got your lawyer's details at the top, name of the landlord, the lessor with their business number, the lease term, if there's options involved, what options are involved, if there's an additional 3-year option, 1 3-year option or 2 3-year options, so it could be a 3x3 or whatever it may be. Whether there's an option to purchase the property down the track at a certain agreement, which I'll talk about in a moment in more detail. The base rent, reviews, if there are any reviews involved, increases, whether it's a increase based on the inflation rate or CPI it's called in some countries, or a fixed increase, or sometimes mainly shopping centres, they have the CPI increase, inflation increase, plus 2% or 1%. Most leases don't have it, but shopping centres are notorious for these extra costs involved in their leases. Other things that could be involved, mainly with shopping centres, are promotional levies. Most of the leases also have to have trading hours of operation, whether it's 5 days, 7 days, whatever it may be. The use, that's very important. It's very important that the landlord understands this as well as a tenant, because it must be the same as a development approval at some stage when that property was developed or the first tenant was in there. And it would have changed over the years. So if it hasn't got a development approval for that use, and the landlord assumes that got that use, and it's found down the track that it can't be used for that purpose, then you've got problems. The situation was packers and boarding houses. Years ago, a lot of boarding houses are running backpackers there, which allowed for more accommodation beds. Didn't allow for it. The actual owners put more beds in there than they were allowed to because they thought it was a backpackers. They assumed it was a backpackers. A situation where there was a backpackers for sale, and the council turned up and they said, "You've got too many beds here." The owner of the property, they said, "It's the backpackers. It's been backpackers for the last 25 years. The attitude from the council was, if you've been operating as a backpackers for the last 25 years, this place has been operating illegally, because when you go back to the original development approval, it was a boarding house. Other things, if there's refurbishment clause or fit out clause involved, maybe some, especially shopping centres, they have clauses in there that they must be refurbished every 5 years or every 3 years or at the end of your initial term of your lease. That's very important. So you factor that into your negotiations and your costs. Public insurance, public liability insurance, normally around $20 million at the moment. It does increase with the highest litigation case in the country at the time to cover it. Some ground floor shops, which are exposed to the street at night, must have plate glass insurance. That's stipulated in the lease as well. You also may have other things like a separate lease for your public areas. For example, if you've got outdoor seating in a restaurant or cafe, you may need a separate lease or license from the council. And there may be a separate lease or license for car parking as well too. That should be taken into account as well. You just assume things are right. Now go back to the option to buy clause. This is a very critical clause. I've had some experience with this over the last few years. Now, there's various ways of structuring it. It could be termed as you can buy this, that the tenant can buy the property within a certain period of time, say in 2-3 years' time only, or it may be another one that can be sold, or they could buy that property in 2 years or within 2 years for a fixed amount of money, no more, no less, or they could have first option to refuse. So it gets to the stage where the owner wants to sell the property, tenant has got first right refusal to buy the property. This could be very tricky because you may be in a situation where you desperately want to sell it, you market the property, you've got buyers there, you may decide to go to auction, you've got to go back to the tenant and tell him or ask him, does he want to buy it? And depending on what state or country you're in, they may have, for example, 21 days to answer. So you've got to buy hot and a trot, willing to pay you a good lot of money, and you could lose them at that 21 days until the tenant decides whether they're going to go ahead or not. So it's very important to know that if you decide to do that. It sounds easy, but it can get very complicated, and you may lose a good buyer because you've inserted that clause. Other clauses are demolition clauses. They are also very controversial as well. I've been involved in a lot of them over the track. Now, it's best to sit down with your commercial real estate coach or real estate agent, understand the situation to work it out. I found generally, in my experience, that's very hard to charge full price for a demolition clause in it, because the tenant knows that in 1 or 2 years when that demolition clause kicks in, they've got no lease. And generally, I found you probably get about half the market rent for it. As a tenant, I know that lawyers convince their clients not to go ahead with the lease, and I understand it. And on the surface, it's not the right thing to do, but there are some advantages. Generally, it takes around, they decide to sell a property or to develop it, could take 1 or 2 years before it goes ahead. In the meantime, the tenant is there for 2 years, much reduced rental. If they buy the business at a good price and they get a good rental, it's worth their while. What will happen is that the owner will develop that building, usually for a mixed use, a residential commercial use, which would include businesses. And it's a good chance that particular tenant will first bite the cherry and get some incentive to move in there. So don't totally rule out. Obviously discuss it with your solicitor, but be aware that there are consequences, good and bad. So investigate them as much as you can. Another thing is a bank guarantee or bond. Now, this varies with what type of property. I found with smaller properties, low demand properties, C-grade standard buildings, 1 or 2 months is a general amount. Most of the leases I've been involved with, thousands I've seen or been negotiated, around about 3 months. Sometimes it could be 6 months or more, depending on what it is. If it's a prestige building, high value, high demand, good location, prime location, then it could be 6 months or more. So be aware of that. Navigating the realm of commercial real estate leases can be daunting. With the right knowledge, understanding of lease structures, Businesses can make informed decisions that align with their goals and financial capabilities. Whether you're a budding entrepreneur exploring commercial space options or an established owner considering lease agreements, this guide will help you in making the right decisions, working with your landlord, ensure that you make the right decisions, working with your lawyer to ensure the best deal for you, your business. Share your comments. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to this channel. More videos like this. This is Contacetus from CST Properties.